Hi, this is Kate Stillman with yogahealer.com, and I'm here with Leslie O'Brien, and Leslie invited me to talk to her peeps, her yoga students and community, or Ayurvedic community, about spices, and yeah, that's where our conversation begins. Hi, Leslie.
Hi, Kate. All right. So, yeah, people really want to hear about the benefits of culinary spices and herbs to their health. And there's a sub question here. I'll give it to you now so you can answer in a rounded way. Is that there are people who eat whole food but somewhat bland diets, simple diets that, they don't want to necessarily go make a pesto, something or other, and put it on the side. Even, pesto to them might be a bit much with herbs in it there. So could you talk about how that fits in for them, and whether they need encouraging with spices, whether they go for ones that I think you've spoken before about suit their palate. Doesn't have to be Indian food, as we know. You go for what, you prefer and your taste, and that may be something that your body from your heritage really has an affinity with.
Yeah.
Love to hear you speak about that.
Yeah. So the question about, like, should I be using more spices in my foods, or or if so, like, what should I be using? I mean, most people are already using something, right? Like, everyone's using salt and pepper. My guess is, like, that's on the table. If you live in Asia, there's soy sauce and red pepper flakes on the table. If you live in Mexico, there's salt and some sort of spicy salsa or hot sauce on the table. So we've kind of got the big one covered, which is something to add more salt, which rounds out a lot of flavors and softens flavors. And we've got something hot, really hot, in the form of a pepper. So what peppers do is they make other foods a lot more digestible for many people. So foods that are heavy. So say, like, for instance, I live in Mexico half time, and people here eat a lot of tacos, and they eat a lot of quesadillas. And both of those things are heavy, right? They have some sort of grain, whether it's corn or wheat, to make the tortilla. They may have meat in there, whether it's carne asada or chicken. They may, if it's a quesadilla, they may have cheese in there. There might be a wheat tortilla with cheese in it. It's like heavy on the digestifier. So if you wake up in the morning and you feel heavy from the food you ate the night before, that usually means that there wasn't enough fire. There wasn't enough digestifier to burn what you put in, or the food was just too heavy for your constitution, or you ate too late at night, or something around that. So the quickest way to, like, pick up your ability to digest that food is to add that hot sauce or the pepper or those red pepper flakes. But what we find is that, that gets kind of boring after a while. And it's also intense. That pepper is just one. If we look at a spectrum of spices that are warming, and we have the cooler spices over here, like cilantro, or its seed form coriander. And then we maybe have, like, cumin, and then we may have fresh ginger, and then dried ginger, and then thyme and marjoram, and then dried ginger is probably actually way over here. And then after dried ginger, we'd have, like, all these different kinds of peppers. So even if you look at, like, peppers, like a habanero pepper is, I can't remember, but it's something like 30 to 3,000 times hotter than black pepper. It's so ridiculously hotter, right? So even within the realm of peppers, we can then open up that spectrum. Now, all of these spices, they're not just delivering heat for digestion. They're also delivering a ton of micronutrients and really these different ways of triggering our body, with different ways of triggering our senses and triggering different reactions within our physiology. So sometimes we want to feel a certain way. For instance, if you look at the spice vanilla, we use a lot of vanilla here too in Mexico because it's local. They use it a lot in Asia where it's also local, right? So vanilla is incredibly sweet. It's not hot at all. It's oily, it's sweet, it's heavy on that hot to cool. It's way over here on that, but it's a flavor to affect food. Vanilla is often also an aphrodisiac, right? So when we smell vanilla, it makes our body relax. It hits our limbic system that says, like, everything's good. Right? Whereas pepper is like, like, wake up, like wake up and live. Like that's the message of pepper.
Mm.
So we can really then see like, wow, the world of spice, what that starts to do is it starts to open the door into the world of plants. And plants as symbiotic pals on the path of life. Right? So in the old days, right, when people used to know what plants grew outside their hut or their house or their dwelling or their cave or their building, right? They knew the plants that lived out there. Then we naturally would use spices because we knew which ones were edible. How did we know? We learned from our grandmother. We'd learn it from the neighbor across the street. There's just part of what we knew. We'd go to the market and we'd see those same plants lying on blankets for sale at the market, and we'd pay a few pennies and we'd get some spice if we weren't able to harvest it ourselves. So now we're in a place where we're really disconnected from that, and we go to the grocery store and all the spices are in these hopefully they're in these bulk section of bigger jars, hopefully. Otherwise they're just in these little jars, and there's no way for you to interact with that plant. It's totally a sterile environment. You walk into a grocery store, it doesn't necessarily smell like food. Right?
Yeah, you can. That's right. The senses, the bridge of the senses between that external environment and internal environment is totally cut off, isn't it?
It's totally cut off. Right? So this plant, it's trying to communicate with your body, right? In order to be basically in relationship with you, is not able to in that totally cut off form. So what we find is that once we start to really awaken our senses and awaken to smell and awaken into like, wow, do I want to add a little cinnamon to my oatmeal this morning? Right? We start to do that, and we start to become more aware of the feeling sense that the oatmeal has with the cinnamon versus without the cinnamon. Right? We take that relationship a few steps further into noticing which spices, or in the realm of when we talk about how spices affect the body, we might say carminatives, things that like heat up and enable food to be more digestible, which carminatives live in the neighborhood of the ecosystem that we're living in, right? And then we start to develop a relationship with those plants, and we start maybe harvesting them fresh in the summer and then drying them in the late summer for the winter, and then using them as teas or spices in the winter. Now we're starting to have a much healthier relationship with our ecology, with our physiology. And as a result, not only is our digestion going to get better, but our sense of connectedness is going to get better. So the spice question is really just a gateway into a much bigger perspective of your life and your body and plants.
Okay, fantastic. On that note, the people who are gardeners and have a pot of mint and a pot of rosemary, if they do take those out of season, take it into their home and dry it, and then use that mint. I mean, obviously you don't want a cool mint. They know not to use a cool mint in the cool season necessarily as your tea. That's not the way to go. But dried rosemary, using it, in culinary form in the kitchen. What do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, when we start to develop relationships with plants, and anyone who's growing plants, you get this. You get that the plant is giving to your air and your atmosphere, and you taste it, and it starts to affect your body. All the essential oils from the plant, they immediately get, access to your body, starts to shift how you feel. It's natural to have an annual experience with your plants. To just, go into an annual cycle of like, what plant phase is it in now? Like, what phase of the plant is it now? Is it it's a latent phase? Is it in its harvest phase? Is it somewhere in between? And then we use the different parts of the plant accordingly. And it's such a natural thing for anyone who plants cilantro and it bolts. You're like, oh no, my cilantro bolted, right? And then it has seeds because it bolted, and you went from flower to seed, and now you have a ton of coriander seed. So what are you going to do? You're going to harvest the seed. If you at all have a clue, you're going to harvest the seed, and then you're going to use that seed all winter. You might grind part of it, just grind what you'll need for that month, and store that in an airtight jar. And then as you're cooking, you might add your coriander. And coriander is considered the cradle of the spices. So it's like it holds all the other flavors in. Yeah. And so having that on your shelf then is great. And then in the summer, as soon as the fresh coriander, the cilantro starts to bolt out of the ground, starts to grow out of the ground, and you have leaves available, you're naturally going to eat those fresh leaves. You're probably not going to eat cilantro leaves in December in a colder climate, right? Because they're imported from somewhere 1,000 miles away at least. They're going to rot really quickly. They're going to be expensive. So it's very natural once you awaken to like spices like that. Wow, if they're not growing outside right now, chances are I'm eating the dried form, whether that's dried cilantro leaves or whether that's dried coriander seeds that have then been blended or crunched down into a powder.
That's really helpful for some people I know here who thought that they were eating not enough spices, and you've totally allowed and given a permission for them to appreciate the salt, pepper, the herbs in their pots that they've got. So that's as simple as it needs to be for a lot of these people. So fantastic, so helpful, thank you.
Yeah, and use the spice chart. So I'll send the PDF with the spice chart. You guys just print that out and then start to study the chart. Pin it right to your refrigerator, and then start to see like what are the sort of the biochemical effects of this plant in my body? How is this plant interacting with my physiology? And then you start to develop really a repertoire of remedies from knowing that. For instance, say, and when does a spice become an herb? Like that's another, question, right? So say you look at something like mint, which is, it's cooling and it's dilating. So say you're overheated or someone has like really hot summer allergies and a lot of rashes, like, will drinking mint tea help? Yeah, it's going to start to cool their body down. If you have lavender flowers growing in your garden and you make that mint tea and you add a little bit of lavender. Now, lavender flower is a spice. Yeah, it's used a ton in French cooking, right? If you look at different cuisines, you'll see, there's a lot of these flower essences in here. There's these use of pansies over here and lavender over here and rose over there. Well, we're bringing that in. So now the flower becomes, a spice, right? It becomes a flavor that's added to the food. We use that then in our spice cabinet, right? When our rose petals needed. Well, rose petals are amazing for hot flashes or for menstrual issues or really anytime we need like a touch of the divine feminine. So when we start to tap into like, wow, these spices then also become our medicine cabinet. And that's what that little PDF will help you start to bridge that.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Leslie from the Botanicals and the Ayurvedic Health Practice. And we make herb and spice infusions with organic herb and spices based on Ayurvedic theory. And both Kate and I, being Ayurvedic practitioners, understand that. And we've come here today to ask Kate of her thorough and wise understanding of how the kitchen can be your pharmacy, so that even though I sell these herbs and spices in a packet, I don't necessarily want you to rely on them. I would love you to rely on your own kitchen cupboard and what's in your garden. And Kate's the perfect person to answer these questions. Thanks, Kate.